You've probably heard of cognitive behavior therapy, right? CBT. It's one of the biggest names in psychotherapy. But for a lot of us, what actually goes on in a session feels like a total mystery. Well, today, we're going to pull back that curtain. We are going inside a typical CBT session to demystify the entire process.
So let's just ask it. What really happens in there? Is it just talking for an hour? Do you have to lie on a couch and talk about your childhood? With CBT, the reality is way more structured, way more practical, and honestly, way more collaborative than you might imagine.
Okay, so here's the best way to think about it. A CBT session isn't some mysterious, vague conversation. It's more like two people, the therapist and you, working together from a shared blueprint. It's a clear, understandable plan for building your mental well-being one step at a time. And here is our blueprint for this explainer. We're going to start with the core ideas behind that blueprint. Then we'll look at how the foundation gets built. After that, we'll dive into the actual framework of a session, check out the toolkit they use, and finally, see how you put it all into practice in your daily life. So every single CBT session, no matter what you're talking about that day, is guided by 5 interconnected ideas. You can think of these as these powerful streams that are just constantly flowing through the entire process, shaping every single conversation. So here are those 5 streams. Now, some of these you might expect, right? Like changing dysfunctional thoughts. That makes sense. But others might be a little surprising, like how structured the sessions are, or the huge role that homework plays in making sure all this progress actually leaves the therapy office and comes with you into your real life. And the very first part of building anything, the absolute foundation of this whole blueprint, comes down to one thing before any techniques are even mentioned: the human connection, that bond between the therapist and the client.
Now, let's just tackle this head on. There's this common myth out there that because CBT is so structured, it must be, cold or robotic. But as our source material points out, that could not be further from the truth.
The reality is the complete opposite. Study after study shows that a positive, trusting relationship is one of the biggest predictors of a good outcome. It makes sense, right? Without that foundation of trust and teamwork, all the tools and techniques in the world just aren't going to be as effective.
So how is this trust built? Well, it's not magic. It's a very active process. Of course, the therapist shows empathy and understanding, but they also share the entire game plan with you openly. Decisions are made together, like a team. And, this is so important, they are constantly asking for feedback, making sure you feel heard and respected every single step of the way. Okay, so once that foundation of trust is in place, the next layer of our blueprint is the framework of the session itself. And this structure isn't there just to be rigid. It's there to create a sense of safety, clarity, and focus, which makes the whole process feel predictable and, frankly, much less intimidating. A typical session has this really predictable 3-part rhythm. It kicks off with a check-in, how was your week, and then you both decide on an agenda for that day's session. The middle part, that's the bulk of the work, where you dig into those agenda items and learn new skills. And the end is all about wrapping up, summarizing the takeaways, planning the homework for the week ahead, and, yep, there it is again, getting your feedback on how the session went.
All right, so we've got the relationship and we've got the structure.
Now we get to open up the toolkit, the actual practical techniques used inside that framework to help people really change their patterns of thinking.
At the absolute heart of CBT is this idea of automatic thoughts. Think of them like the pop-up ads of your mind. They're these ideas or images that just appear, and we often just accept them as 100% true. They happen so fast we barely notice them, but man, they have a huge impact on how we feel and what we do. The first step is just learning to spot them.
So how in the world do you catch one of these things? It often starts with what might be the most powerful question in all of CBT. What is going through your mind right now? A therapist will ask this the exact moment they see your mood shift, to catch that thought red-handed. Let's see how this plays out with a client named Sally.
So Sally's talking about maybe looking for a part-time job, and the therapist notices her mood just sink. The therapist asks the question, and Sally reveals this automatic thought: I won't be able to handle a job. And that single thought is what's making her feel sad and keeping her from even looking for work. Now here's the crucial part. The therapist doesn't just argue and say, oh, that's not true. Instead, they start a process called guided discovery. You basically become detectives, together, using these kinds of questions to investigate the thought. That last one, what advice would you give a friend? That's a brilliant way to get some distance and objectivity. It's not about being told you're wrong. It's about helping you discover a new, more helpful perspective all on your own.
And look at this. This is the result of that process. After looking at the evidence, Sally lands on a much more balanced, more realistic perspective. She hasn't swung to some wild, blind optimism. She's just moved from a place of I won't to a place of I might. And that small shift in thinking can have a massive, massive impact on her feelings and her actions.
But here's the thing, the goal of CBT isn't just to have these aha moments in the therapy room. The real work doesn't stop when the hour is up. The whole point is to take this blueprint and apply it to the other 10,000 minutes of your week. A huge part of this is actively rewiring your focus. Our brains, especially when we're struggling, have this kind of built-in negative filter. We notice everything that went wrong and just ignore what went right. CBT works to actively counteract this, to deliberately train your brain to spot the positive data, to see your own strengths, and to notice those little moments of good coping that you'd otherwise just dismiss.
And that brings us to our final stream, homework. I know, the word homework can make people groan, right? But this is not like school. It's not a test you can pass or fail. A much better way to think about it is as practice. It's your chance to try out new skills and actively build yourself a better week.
So what does this practice actually look like? Well, it flows directly from what you worked on in the session. For Sally, whose thought was, I can't handle a job, a behavioral experiment might be to just spend 15 minutes looking at job ads online. Not applying, not even sending an email, just looking. The goal is to gather a little bit of real-world data to test that negative prediction and prove to herself, step by step, what she's really capable of.
So there you have it. We've walked through the whole blueprint. The collaborative relationship that forms the foundation, the clear structure that creates safety, and the powerful toolkit for change. It really demystifies the whole thing, doesn't it? It shows that it's much more about method than mystery, which, of course, leaves us with one final thought. Now that you've seen the blueprint, which of your own automatic thoughts might be ready for a little guided discovery?